Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Cloud Identity for Higher Education, Maximize Security, Minimize Impact on Resources. I'm Shay Mann, and I will be your moderator today. Today's webinar is in listen-only mode, so if you have any questions throughout the event, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A panel, and we will answer them during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. This session will be recorded, and we will email you a link to the recorded version tomorrow. Joining us today is Adam Basia, Senior Cloud Technology Evangelist at SailPoint. We also have Donovan Blaylock, Director of Higher Education Solutions here at SailPoint, presenting for us today. And we have got a lot to cover, so with that, Adam, I will pass it over to you to get us started.
Thanks, Shay. Appreciate it. So actually, before we kick off, wanted to do just a couple of quick poll questions to kind of get a feel for what our audience maturity level is in terms of identity management, and also, in terms of cloud adoption. So if we can, we're going to see if we can kick off a quick question for everyone to answer. Hopefully you guys will see that pop up on your screen as question one. Please just submit your answer. We'll give you a couple of seconds. All right, looks like most folks have answered, so that's good news. Shay, if you don't mind popping up the second question for everyone. There we go. And this one really, again, is, we're asking, does your organization currently use cloud-based solutions for any practice? Again, what we're talking about is if you have Salesforce.com for your CRM, if you're using ServiceNow for your service and incident management, heck, if you've got Workday for your HR system, just want to make sure we understand sort of where folks are at in terms of their cloud adoption, so please let us know. Give it just a couple more seconds for everyone to finish up. All right, I think that's everybody. Awesome. Well, thank you so much. That kind of will help Donovan and I as we go through really sort of framing up the type of conversation that we want to have today and make sure we're covering this in a way that sort of addresses the needs of the actual audience online. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. Now, when we talk about identity in higher education, people often associate that with enabling students and faculty to access information in a timely fashion. And that is, of course, critical. However, identity also plays another part in higher education, and that's cybersecurity. Securing access to sensitive data is one of the biggest challenges facing IT departments in higher education today. I think most of us know that preventing a data breach has always been an uphill climb, but unfortunately that hill really is getting steeper, and here's what I mean. First of all, the cost of cybersecurity is rising, with an estimated $124 billion being spent worldwide this year alone. And at the same time, we currently have millions of unfilled information security positions, and vacancies are going to continue to rise. These numbers represent the total worldwide across all industries, including higher education, but in our own experience, we've even talked to some institutions that were so shorthanded they were using part-time student workers to manage security. Now, these rising costs and personnel skill shortages, coupled with sort of persistent security, cybersecurity threats and regulatory pressure, are really creating a huge risk potential for higher education. And the problem, of course, is you can't sacrifice security and compliance simply because you have limited resources. And the fact remains, the cost of preventing a breach is nothing compared to the cost of remediation after an incident has occurred. Some of you may have heard, just recently hackers were able to access student data, including grades, financial information, and social security numbers through a vulnerability in an enterprise resource planning system. That massive breach affected 62 colleges and universities. The ERP firm has since published a patch that fixed the security flaw, but it serves as a reminder that security really needs to be of the utmost importance for higher education. And what am I talking about there? Well, a Panama study said it costs higher education institutions $260 per compromised record. Now you can imagine just how many records each of those 62 universities had compromised. The total financial exposure was enormous. And yet when another analyst firm, the Tamblyn Group, conducted a survey of 100 higher education institutions, they found that 69% of respondents said they're spending less than 1/10 of their IT budget on security. More often than not, institutions just don't have the resources to do what they really need, even if they have the budget. So how can we help address these issues? Well, part of the answer is part of the reason we asked the question, right? It's already gaining adoption, but really the cloud is bringing a lot of new opportunities to organizations that don't have dedicated resources. And in fact, another research firm, Meritalk, estimated that 62% of higher education applications would be cloud-based by 2021. That essentially means 2/3 of all applications that organizations like yours are using are going to be based in the cloud in just 2 years. Now, the other part of the solution is identities, or really more specifically, the ability to govern identities and their access rights to applications and files wherever that information resides. By coupling those two parts, cloud-based identity governance has the potential to deliver ideal security and compliance capabilities, even for higher education institutions with limited resources. So let's dive into cloud-based identity governance to better understand what it is and how it can benefit colleges and universities. First off, when we say identity governance, we're not focusing on single sign-on or authentication. That's really just access. While that is an important element of identity, we want to focus on sort of the governance side of things, the technology that enables higher education institutions to determine and control who has access to what, who should have that access, and then how that access is being used. See, when you have deep visibility and control over digital identities access rights, you're able to improve users' access experience while simultaneously mitigating cybersecurity and compliance risks. Moreover, you enable more efficient IT and operational processes that ultimately drive cost savings. So with all that said, let's go ahead and dive into how this applies specifically to you in the field of higher education. And for that, I'm going to turn it over to Donovan, who's going to highlight some of the identity use cases that are most relevant in a higher ed setting.
Thanks, Adam. Hi, everybody. So yeah, let's look at a practical discussion here around some of the specific use cases we see unique in the education, the higher ed space. There are some similarities out there, of course, with most commercial customers, but higher ed has cases that are very commonly unique to them and that we see almost consistently across every higher ed customer that we have. So I'm just going to focus on some of those today and deep dive into what those might look like and those concerns might be so that you can understand kind of one of the ways that we address these issues. So without further ado, we're looking at governing of complex user populations. The population of a university typically is extremely complex. You have students, you have staff, you have something in between, you have research institutions, you may have an attached hospital that does work through your medical wing as well, throughout your medical university. There can be lots of permutations of types of people who are entering in the university. You also have people that are alumni, perhaps being managed by your organization. And sometimes those groups are all managed together and sometimes they're managed separate. However, one thing is consistent, as universities always have a very complex user population to work with. So that can be challenging. How do we keep those groups apart or together? How do we apply best practices that are needed for each? And often the best practices for each type of population are very different from the other. First of all, they may have different types of regulation. We'll talk about that in a minute. But they have different needs. They have different security concerns. So those things often need to be managed a little bit separately, but you want there to be some sort of unified approach across the board so you can make this a program with which you can manage more effectively over time. And then we'll move to the next one, so IT and operational efficiencies. This really does apply across the board to all types of customers out there, but it's a little different when we talk to higher ed. Often you're doing a lot more with a lot less. You're dealing with very large numbers of people in your organization compared to a company that may be of a similar size from an income perspective. So the numbers of the people involved in your organization are typically much higher, and the staff that's dedicated to IT security in general is much lower than that of a bank. So I think it probably makes some logical sense, but you're having to do more with less. For that reason, often, as Adam mentioned, people from the university are sometimes involved. You have graduate students, sometimes students helping out with these endeavors. Sometimes there's been homegrown solutions to meet some of the niche needs inside here as well that are built by the university and people that might come from the computer sciences department itself. But the bottom line is there's still requirements for security. There's still requirements out there to meet government regulation, and there's still a need to protect what's going on with the information that's housed in these identity management platforms. But the ITs and operational efficiencies are very key to make sure that it's not only an efficient process, but you're increasing the overall security of the enterprise. So to protect yourself from not only embarrassments, right, of what may occur, but information that gets leaked out can do quite a bit of harm to your organization and to the individuals as well. So there's a built-in need there to really make sure this is done not only efficiently, but in an effective manner. And we'll go ahead and move to the next one. So I mentioned this before, I alluded to this, but complying with government regulations can be a big deal. And universities are interesting. You may have a contract with a government agency. Let's call it energy, right? Department of Energy. That department has a lot of regulation and how information about the people on that project are handled. And there's a handoff at some point in time between the higher education universities and government. However, there is a hybrid section there too, which is part that you will typically control. Same thing happens if you have a teaching hospital attached to your university. There will be a handoff, and often it's a separate business unit, not always, but often it is. But there is a part with which you want to manage both of them inside your enterprise, and you need some HIPAA guidelines. So GDPR being another, you have a foreign student, or if you're a university and you have a practice that either travels or has a campus overseas, you face GDPR restrictions. So what I'm getting to is, while the industry in and of itself does not have a lot of regulation, you touch a lot of areas that have regulation. So the needs to meet those regulations are often very clear and very needed, and the expertise to do that can be very challenging to have at a higher ed institution. Then we'll move to the next one. So disparate processes. It is not uncommon for us to see when we go into an organization that there is a different stovepipe process for each key system across the university because they built it from scratch. They built it from as needed throughout the program, and it sort of was a break fix for when things were done. And these processes are often done different ways in different departments, even inside the university. So they each have their own little process, and there's no consistency across the board in checking or verifying or doing compliance certifications, or any of that is inconsistent across the board. We're seeing that fairly regularly throughout the enterprise, our education, and moving that disparate beneficial from a security perspective, but it's a lot more efficient from a people perspective as well. And then we'll move to the next one. This is a really interesting one we see almost every university I've talked to has had this as a very key requirement. And let me describe to you what multiple personas will mean. You will likely have people in your institution who are employees, but they also are going to school there. They're a student. And then maybe they sit on a research board. And these three sets of themselves, these three personas, we call them, have different kinds of access. And they have different managerial chains. They have different reporting requirements. They have different people who may need to see and request additional access on your behalf. And those should never be overlapped. You may stop being a student at some point in time, but you're still on the research board and you're still an employee. And when that gets terminated, it should never touch your access as an employee. So we see this pretty consistently. The need to manage, while you being a single identity, a single person, you have multiple what we call personas across the enterprise. And this is a pretty common requirement from universities as well. And then we'll move to the next one. So the access workflows. If you can normalize these really complex processes that likely have been built from the ground up over time into a more standardized practice, it allows higher education universities to get more lockstep with systems going forward. So let me kind of paint a picture here. You've got a department, an IT department, who early on decided this is how you're going to build ticketing systems, and this is when you're going to open a ticket, and this is how things go. Over time, that expanded out to a much wider audience of people who need to have change requests put into the systems for the university outside the IT department. Very common that this has happened, right? What's the process? How do they go in there? How do they access it? And what are they going to use it for? And who can look at that data, right? All those change over time as IT has become more pervasive throughout the university, both amongst the employee body, but also the student body in the organization. And by the way, higher ed tends to really make those lines very gray because always students need access to things as well, labs, specialized equipment, et cetera. inside the university, and they want to be able to see their stuff as well about themselves. So this improving and access workflow is really built around taking an industry that often has built homegrown solutions and putting them into a more modern, sustainable, standardized fashion that we know works across multiple enterprises. So hopefully that makes some logical sense. We can certainly talk more about that if we ever need to. And then let's go to the next one that's really big. It mentions authoritative sources, and what is that? When people come into a normal company, they come in typically through HR, and that's normal. When people come into university, they typically come in 3 or 5 different ways. So it can be very interesting how that works out. They can be a shared person coming from a different university that are coming over a time, or they can come in through one system or the employee system, potentially HR, but there might be multiple HRs. What I'm getting to is your identities enter your institution in many, many different ways. So they'll come from multiple what we call authoritative sources, or systems of record that can create a new identity in your enterprise. And this can happen in multiple ways. You have to think about that when you're dealing with identity and management and governance of those identities and the access involved, because you need to normalize that a little bit so you can still manage them in a single system, even though they're coming from separate systems, likely with different types of attributes and different names of those attributes and different fields that don't necessarily match up with the HR system of record. Pretty used to doing that. This can help out an awful lot. It also helps provide a single source of truth back when you have an identity store of all the people that come from all the authoritative sources, which is often a very nice thing to have, and it's kind of a hidden benefit to deploying an identity governance solution. So hopefully that makes sense. And then we'll go to the last one, the protection of data. I can't speak enough to this, and that is the amount of data being stored at higher education institutions is growing yearly exponentially. Not only the number of megabytes and gigabytes and terabytes of data is growing, but the complexity of who has access to it is also growing exponentially. So you may have a file storage out there on a Box account or a SAN drive where you back things up internally that are very important, and then maybe share it with somebody, and somebody else creates that share, and they share in a different place, or they share in a different method. And then another group being added to it. My point is, when you look down on these files and folders, you find a whole myriad of ways that people get access, people being granted everyone group to a place where sensitive files are stored. This is becoming a real problem. In the past, we've really kind of talked about here so far today, access to systems and how you normalize that, but access is more than just this access to files and folders that often have the keys to your kingdom. They have very sensitive information. We're seeing the breaches that occur happening more and more in this area and less into the type of access people have into your critical systems, but more they're going after the data, because if they find a good shared drive out there that they can get into and extract personal information about students or employees or what you're working on for research grants, all that information can be used for nefarious purposes fairly easily from a shared drive perspective. So hopefully that makes sense as well. So just a little bit on each one of these, but these are areas we definitely see quite a bit in higher education, almost in every use case out there, and we do focus on those and have specific parts of our products that help answer each one of these. So thanks for that. And then we'll move on.
All right, thanks, Donovan. So, obviously having understood what cloud-based identity means and really how it can benefit your institution, it's also important to sort of better understand what type of cloud deployment best fits your organization. After all, there are different flavors of cloud, and just because a vendor says they have a cloud solution doesn't really mean that they have the one that best fits your needs. So let's explore sort of how various types of cloud deployments work. Now, we'll start off with SaaS. This is a methodology that's really developed exclusively to work from the cloud. SaaS enables higher education institutions to rapidly adopt a comprehensive approach to identity. It really takes advantage of the fast time to value and ease of use that only a SaaS solution can provide. SaaS deployment is especially ideal for colleges and universities that have very limited IT and financial resources dedicated to managing and maintaining an identity platform, primarily because SaaS requires no additional capital investment, and it doesn't require staff to manage ongoing upgrades, patching, etc. So, sort of as a I guess, a tie-out on this one. The SaaS approach is really ideal for institutions that need fast time to value and ease of use, but who also possess minimal IT and financial resources. The second one that we'll talk about is the MSP approach. And really, this one is sort of synonymous with hosted. So typically, hosted solutions are delivered by a trusted managed service provider. However, in the case of SailPoint, we also have an offering of our own that is managed by SailPoint. So a lot of different ways that a hosted solution can be implemented. In this deployment option, educational institutions delegate some or all of their identity governance administration to a proven service provider to assess, deploy, manage, and even support the overall identity efforts. This program is probably ideal for institutions that, like the SaaS model, possess limited IT resources or want to focus their resources on other areas, and also probably want to reduce their initial capital investment. However, they may also require some customization and configuration that meets very specific use cases. Donovan talked earlier about the multiple persona issue. They may also have requirements for very specific systems. So systems that are homegrown or unique, something that is developed in-house for a specific laboratory experiment or something of that nature. Costs are typically a little bit higher in this model, but it does allow for more flexibility. And then last but not least, let's talk about the hybrid model. So, early on, we asked a couple of polling questions, and there were several folks actually that said that they already had an identity management solution in place. That being the case, it's likely a legacy solution. Otherwise, probably wouldn't be on this call. So if you're using an Oracle or an IBM, something like that, you've got a legacy system that is already on premises. This deployment model sort of helps because it kind of incorporates a combination of traditional on-premises identity governance practices with some component of a cloud solution. So it enables colleges and universities to maintain and configure many internal processes as needed, while still capturing some of the benefits associated with cloud solutions. And probably the best example of that I can give is something like self-service password management for end users. So you've still got some of your identity management being hosted in-house, but at least to your end users, you can take advantage of the cloud and its ability to work on mobile platforms or from anywhere. To sort of summarize on hybrid, the approach may be the best fit for institutions that have existing extremely complex identity management workflows and want to take more of a staged approach to moving their identity practice to the cloud. So again, we can even implement from SailPoint standpoint for those folks that want to move off of a legacy platform to a modern platform, an instance of one particular platform on premises and then components of our in the cloud solution as well. So like an MSP hosted deployment, there's probably a strong need to provision some specific core educational systems that are unique. And that's another reason that folks typically will go with a hybrid approach. So with all of that setup said, and also to make sure that people are still awake after hearing my voice, let's throw up at least one more poll question and just kind of get a readout. So, based on the information you've heard so far, what deployment methodology do you think would best fit your organization's needs? And this will kind of help us sort of understand, and we'll actually throw the results up here as everybody finishes voting. Give it a few more seconds, make sure everyone's got votes in. There we go. All right, so interesting. So we're actually seeing a lot of folks saying SaaS, and this is something that we're seeing a lot more really in the industry as well. But 75% basically saying that SaaS identity platform is kind of the approach that they want to take. A few folks for the others as well. So kind of an interesting result. One of the things that I guess is key to sort of keep in mind and just to make sure everyone understands, especially those folks that are talking about SaaS, the methodology for how you want to implement a cloud deployment is really equally important in terms of the type of solution that you want to provide. So understand the cost and benefit of customization versus configuration, and really what is the best fit for you. So make sure as you're talking to vendors about solutions, especially if you're interested in a SaaS solution, that you understand if they have a true SaaS solution, something that is multi-tenant, something that delivers updates on a consistent, regular basis. So continuous delivery, all of those things are really important for a true SaaS solution.
So the benefits of deploying identity from the cloud or from a hybrid solution, I think these make logical sense, but it's worth talking about each one of these a little bit right now. So there certainly is, we mentioned several times now in different ways, the need to reduce in-house expertise or hire expertise or have FTEs dedicated to this practice. That is the need across most higher education. We mentioned they need to do more with less. And then decreasing capital expenditure. Universities of what has become, this pricing for a lot of functionality in the IT world, and that has continued down the path. It's easy to consume. It makes sense. If universities are working with others or spinning up or spinning down, they can very quickly change subscription models, and I do find some benefit inside that as well. And my apologies if audio is coming across bad. I am traveling and kind of at the whim of whatever my phone can do. So hopefully that makes sense. And then lastly, we'll focus on a couple of last ones, and that is deploying very rapidly, and then slashing time for upgrades to stay concurrent and secure. All those are very big. And then last but not least, what we focused on earlier, which is the configuration for the unique use cases that exist out there. So hopefully those make lunch. All of these are pushing, in particular, our higher education customers to going closer to the cloud.
Yeah, and one thing that I'll mention as well on this, so obviously, rapid deployment and slashing lead times for upgrades, those tend to be better focuses for SaaS, whereas configuring for unique use cases may be a better fit for a hybrid solution or even a hosted solution.
Thanks, Adam. That's right. And so here's a couple of questions to consider in how you're going to deploy out there, SaaS versus some sort of hosted solution out there. And, do you have the expertise in-house and, to do this, right? That's done this before or has done this successfully in another location. Sometimes you do, but often you do not. So the expertise question is a very legitimate one to ask yourself in this type of situation. And then also what's your time frame, right? We prefer as a company to do what's called crawl, walk, run, in there, because you can get some wins. You deploy things over time that make sense, and you build this program more capable over time. There are times when an organization needs to run really quickly, and they're all in. And those are kind of driven by the needs of the situation at hand inside each university out there. And then how much time and effort are you spending for compliance issues? Some universities don't have this as a high priority. Other ones do, and it's because of the uniqueness of each higher education institution that whether or not these compliance efforts are important or not, that's what drives those things. Or it could be from an incident that happens fairly regularly also. And then, how much configuration do you need? Is the university willing to accept what is deemed best practices across the board for these functionalities, or does it really want to drive its own special use cases? That really kind of helps us decide if this needs to be a SaaS or a hosted or a hybrid solution inside the environment. And again, we can help making these decisions. And then do you need to eliminate capital expenditure? I think in general, most universities say yes. They want to go subscription for most things. And this is a way to go in that effort as well, along with best practices, which is why we see the high cloud adoption in this particular vertical more than others out there. So hopefully these questions help jog some things to think about when you're deciding about how to do this and which method to go about. So thanks for that. And I'll hand it back over to Adam.
So we'll actually go into a couple of key takeaways here. So one, obviously, not surprisingly, cloud is here to stay. All of the research that we've seen really points to the fact that cloud adoption is on the rise in every industry vertical that we look at, but especially in the higher education space. Again, going back to the quote from earlier, it sounds like at least 2/3 of all applications that higher education institutions will be using in the next couple of years will be in the cloud. So understand that cloud is the future, and it does make sense to try and begin at least a migration path at this point if you are on a legacy identity solution. Identity reduces risk. So at the end of the day, hopefully we've done a good job of explaining how combining all of the different pieces of information that reside in different systems about an individual, the things that they have access to, how they can access them, and then in particular, as Donovan pointed out, what data resides in those systems that they're able to get to. Having that all in one place and being able to manage it and govern it really is important. And so we believe that identity is sort of the future of how security will work for large groups of populations, which obviously the higher education space has. Cloud identity lowers cost. Again, particularly in the SaaS side of the house, it is very easy to implement a solution, pay for it via OpEx versus CapEx, and have it just be an expenditure that works without having to hire up or train resources, especially in the higher education space where you may have turnover from student workers 1 year to the next year. It really helps to be able to have a steady stream solution in place that's managed and maintained by a third party. And then last but not least, one size does not fit all. Again, we went through several cloud methodology solutions. So hopefully folks understand that there is a difference between how cloud gets implemented, and really do your homework, do some research, understand which solution is best for you. If you want to come talk to us, we actually have solutions across the board for all of those, but we will take a very consultative approach to make sure we find the solution that best fits the type of organization that you have and where you're looking to go. So with that, I think I'll turn it back over to Shay, and I think we've got some next steps and takeaways.
Excellent. Great presentation, Adam and Donovan. Thank you so much. We will now enter the Q&A portion. So just a reminder, if you have a question, submit that via the Q&A panel, and we'll answer as many as we can in the time we have left. So with that, let's jump in. We've got our first question. Do you have examples of a hybrid deployment between SaaS and on-premises or SaaS and hosted?
Yeah, that's actually an easy one that I'll take if you don't mind, Donovan. So I actually mentioned this a little bit earlier, but this is, and I guess the reason I mentioned it, it's the most frequent example that we see. So we have a lot of customers within SailPoint that are using an on-premises solution. We've had the industry-leading on-premises solution for the last 10 years or so, looking at basically Gartner, Forrester, any analyst survey. However, a lot of them are looking for ways to sort of improve specifically things like user experience. So password management and the ability to self-service password reset. A lot of times folks, have a lot of people that are on the road or that are not working out of basically a large corporate office within the firewall. And so if they can reset their own passwords, if I'm traveling to China and I'm in a completely different time zone, I don't want to have to wait for the IT department to come online, 4 hours later before I can get back into my system or get into a specific application that I need to. So the most frequent sort of hybrid environment that we see, or that deployment model, is actually within our own customer base. We see a lot of our on-premises customers adopting our cloud solution specifically for password management. And then a lot of them sort of end up using that as a crawl, walk, run, as Donovan alluded to sort of pick up other things along the way, access requests, those types of things that are a little bit easier to deploy via the cloud.
Excellent, thank you. Okay, next question. My concern is around having control of student and faculty data if it moves into the cloud. How much control would I have with a SaaS identity solution?
Adam, I'm going to let you answer that one. I think you can answer it more fully.
I was actually hoping that you were going to field that one as our expert. But what I will say, depending on the type of solution that you work with. So in particular, our SaaS solution, Identity Now, is a solution that is based around zero trust. So we have a patented technology that basically we call zero knowledge encryption, that ensures that the information, when it's passed from our virtual appliance, which is behind your firewall as a customer, all the information, once it passes from that through your firewall, it's encrypted. We never actually see it, and we don't hold the key on our side. So the key pair is only on the virtual appliance within the customer's hosted environment. So at the end of the day, we actually never have that information in our possession in an unencrypted format. So that's really the way to ensure that no information is ever sort of passed on outside of your firewall in a way that can be taken. And then obviously we host our solution on AWS, so we have all of the controls in place that Amazon puts in place for all of its security and control policies as well.
Great, thank you. So how difficult is it to integrate an existing cloud SSO authentication solution with a cloud governance platform like what you've described?
Yeah, you want me to jump in there?
I was going to say, I can take this one. So no, yeah, if you want to jump in, I think obviously we've got a pretty good perspective with some of our partners like Okta and even Microsoft on the Azure front. So yeah, go for it.
Yeah, and that's just it. So one of our most common integration sets is with these single sign-on authentication sets out there that often customers already have with this SSO, MFA, authentication being handled by that provider. So yeah, the Ping, the Okta, the Azures of the world, that integration is one of the most common. And the interesting part of that is as a user grows and gets their access changed, it shows up because of the integrations we have on that SSO page, and you know, all that information populates on that page. So the really great benefit of this is when we work together with those providers is that you get all the benefits of that SSO MFA world, and then you also have all the automations of the life cycle and the onboarding and the automations we do with access showing up in that product real time, which is just fantastic for customers. So it's probably our most common integration out there are with those providers. We're very used to it, and it's really, really mature at this point in time.
Yeah, and I'll add this in. Donovan mentioned it. So we have two very common use cases. One is SSO, and the other is actually PAM integrations. We have really robust integrations built out with a number of both SSO and PAM vendors because this is such a common integration. So not
a great question, though.
Thank you both. Okay, we've got time for about one more question. So how much quicker can you deploy a cloud solution versus a hosted or on-prem solution?
Well, one thing I'll throw in, and Donovan will hopefully be happy that I'm mentioning this. I want to make sure, so I think you said a cloud solution versus a hosted versus an on-prem solution. A hosted solution is still a cloud-based solution. So, you know, that first one, cloud solution versus hosted is still a cloud-based solution. There's just the real differences between a SaaS solution and a hosted solution. So a SaaS solution is one that is managed completely by the vendor that is supplying it. All of the upgrades are handled by them. And then it is a true multi-tenant microservices-based architecture so that you're receiving continuous upgrades and improvements to the product as they are rolled out. So, you know, sort of real time. A hosted solution, on the other hand, it is traditionally a larger software stack that is just managed in the cloud by a third-party vendor. That may be the vendor that provides the software themselves, or it may be by a service provider. So back to the question, which one is faster or how much quicker is one to deploy than the other? Traditionally, SaaS solutions are going to be the faster ones to deploy. But again, that's also primarily because you make some trade-offs in the use cases that you can solve. You need to understand that SaaS is based around best practices. In particular, our solution has a very large number of customers where we have best practices baked in from 10 years of really doing identity so that the workflows are configurable and easy to do. And it really becomes a much faster deployment because we have these tight integrations to a lot of different systems that tend to be typical systems, right? The Workdays of the world, Active Directory, those types of things. If there are a lot of really complex workflows and things that need to be done, we can still do that, but obviously that will slow down the solution. And that's where a hybrid solution or a hosted solution or even an on-premises solution may come in handy because you have such complex workflows and different solutions that you need to build out. Those are going to be slower. But if you're an organization that can take advantage of best practices, man, a SaaS solution is going to be very fast to implement and provide a much better time to value for you.
Yeah, and I'll just tack onto that really quick too, right? And this is not a static answer very commonly in universities. Sometimes there's a need for maybe that MSP offering because we're replacing really complex home-built systems in the beginning with the intent that we want to get best practices done and then we want to move to the cloud. And I'll give you a very easy example here. One is the right to be forgotten, right, which is pretty common amongst universities. So you likely have built a process or a system with which to enable that capability set throughout the enterprise, or the anonymization of somebody's name in your organization, so that can't be seen by anybody. And those are requirements that universities often have, and you've probably built systems around that capability set. As the identity provider, us, take on that functionality, and we more normalize that functionality over time. Once that's normalized, then you can easily consume everything inside the cloud platform. So I would say this is a moving item to think about as well. Often, if you just can't do all the SaaS right now, the intent is to get you there, because it does have the lowest TCO a year to do for an organization, and we're bringing in best practices, and we're constantly updating it from a security perspective. So it's really beneficial to an organization to go that route, and we'd like to help you along that path. So just keep in mind, the answer today may be one thing with the intent of going somewhere else tomorrow.
Thank you, Donovan. Okay, that is all the time we have for today. Adam and Donovan, thank you so much for your presentation. Keep an eye out for an email from us tomorrow that will include a recording of today's webinar. You can listen to it on demand or share with interested colleagues that weren't able to join us. We'll also be including Norwich University's customer success story, so you can really dive in deeper and see how a peer of yours succeeded in implementing cloud identity. Thanks to everyone who joined us on the line, and enjoy the rest of your day.